Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our presentation on oligopoly. Today, we'll be exploring markets that are dominated by just a handful of powerful companies and how these firms compete with each other. This topic is crucial for understanding many industries where competition is limited, but strategic interactions are intense. I'm excited to take you through this fascinating study of market dynamics and competitive behavior. Let's dive in. Here we define what an oligopoly is. Essentially, it's a market dominated by just a few large firms that supply the majority of the products or services. Because there aren't many players, each company's actions, whether it's setting prices, advertising, or deciding how much to produce, can directly affect the others. This interdependence is a key feature of oligopolies. The products sold in these markets can be quite similar, like toothpaste, or they can be differentiated by brand or features. This image of various toothpaste brands illustrates how a few companies control most of the market, making strategic decisions while watching their competitors closely. Here we're looking at the key features of an oligopoly. First, it's important to note that in an oligopoly, there are only a few dominant firms that control a significant share of the market sales. This limited number of players makes the market less competitive compared to others. Next, we have high entry barriers. These barriers are strong enough to prevent new companies from easily entering the market, which helps maintain the dominance of the existing firms. Another critical feature is mutual dependence, where firms closely monitor each other's actions and reactions. This creates a strategic environment where decisions by one firm directly influence the others. Lastly, prices tend to remain stable because firms avoid engaging in damaging price wars that could hurt all players in the market. The image on the right, showing recognizable buildings, serves as a visual metaphor for these dominant firms standing tall in the market landscape. Here we focus on the concept of interdependence within oligopoly markets. The headline "Strategic Responses" captures the essence of this dynamic. In an oligopoly, firms can't just act independently. They must carefully consider how their rivals might react whenever they change prices, adjust output, or alter their advertising strategies. This uncertainty creates a constant strategic interaction where every decision can trigger responses that influence the entire market. Think of it as a game of chess, where each move depends on anticipating the opponent's next move. This interdependence shapes the competitive behavior and outcomes in oligopolistic markets. Here we have examples of oligopoly markets, where a few major players dominate their respective industries. Starting with airlines, you can see that a small number of carriers control the market, competing heavily through branding and the range of services they offer. Moving on to wireless carriers, the competition is also among a limited group, with frequent promotions aimed at winning customer loyalty. In the automobile industry, a handful of manufacturers produce most vehicles, focusing on innovation and brand differentiation to stand out. Similarly, soft drink companies rely on strong branding and advertising to maintain their positions within the market. Finally, smartphone makers lead sales through a combination of innovative features and aggressive marketing campaigns. The image on the right, showing a grocery aisle full of various potato chip brands, visually reinforces how these market dynamics play out with multiple competing but dominant brands within a single space. To sum up, oligopoly markets are characterized by a small number of dominant firms, making it difficult for new competitors to enter due to high barriers. These firms closely watch and respond to each other's strategic moves, creating a situation of strong interdependence. Understanding this dynamic is crucial, and next, we'll delve into how game theory helps explain the pricing and output decisions companies make in these markets. This will give us deeper insight into their behavior and strategies. Here we're looking at how firms in an oligopoly interact strategically. First, firms don't make decisions in isolation. They anticipate how their rivals will react when they set prices or decide on output. Essentially, each firm's best move depends on what the others do, creating a complex web of strategic interaction. Moving to the outcomes of these interactions, firms might compete aggressively, trying to outdo each other, or they might silently align their behavior without formal agreements. This shows how oligopolies can lead to both competitive and cooperative results. all shaped by the ongoing decisions and reactions of the firms involved. The image here illustrates a discussion, reflecting how these strategic considerations often involve careful analysis and negotiation. Here we have a classic example of the prisoner's dilemma applied to pricing strategies between two competing firms, Firm A and Firm B. The table shows 4 possible outcomes based on whether each firm decides to keep their price high or cut their price. If both firms keep their prices high, they both enjoy high profits, which is the best mutual outcome. However, if one firm cuts its price while the other keeps it high, the firm that cuts the price gains a higher profit by attracting more customers, while the other suffers lower profits. The tricky situation arises when both firms cut their prices simultaneously, leading to low profits for both, since the market becomes highly competitive. This dilemma highlights how individual incentives can lead to a suboptimal result for both parties, even though cooperation, keeping prices high, would be better overall. Here, we're looking at how output decisions are made within an oligopoly market. The key idea is that each firm's choice about how much to produce doesn't just impact its own sales. It also influences the overall market price and the profits of its competitors. Because of this interdependence, firms often face a strategic dilemma. They might try to keep their production low to keep prices high, benefiting everyone. But there's always a temptation to increase output and capture more sales for themselves. The final outcome really hinges on how these firms interact, whether they act independently, attempt to coordinate, or respond to one another's production changes over time. This dynamic leads to a complex balance of competition and cooperation in oligopolistic markets. Here we're looking at the delicate balance oligopoly firms face between cooperation and temptation. These firms try to work together to raise prices and limit output, which would increase their profits. However, the challenge is that each firm has a strong incentive to cheat by secretly lowering prices or boosting sales to gain an advantage over the others. This tension creates a push and pull dynamic that often leads the market to be more competitive than the firms would ideally want. The image of the handshake represents this fragile agreement, highlighting both the potential for cooperation and the underlying temptation to break the pact. This balance is critical in understanding why firm behavior in oligopolies can be unstable and why market outcomes can vary. Here we focus on strategic decisions that go beyond just pricing. First, advertising and product design play a crucial role. Companies use game theory here to figure out the right level of investment in ads and product features. The goal is to attract customers effectively without provoking costly reactions from competitors. Next, research and development decisions require careful anticipation of rivals' innovations and timing. By doing this, firms can maintain their competitive edge and stay ahead in the market. Finally, capacity and launch timing involve planning for expansion and new product introductions in a way that outmaneuvers competitors and maximizes profits. All these strategic moves work together to ensure a strong market position beyond just competing on price. Here we see how advertising plays a crucial role in brand rivalry. Firms ramp up their advertising efforts to attract more customers and build loyalty. However, their competitors quickly respond by increasing their own advertising to protect their market share. This back and forth leads to rising ad spending overall, but it doesn't necessarily grow the total market demand. The key concept here comes from game theory, which explains why companies continue to advertise despite the high costs. If they don't match their rivals' advertising, they risk losing ground, so they have little choice but to keep investing heavily in marketing. This dynamic creates an ongoing cycle of competitive advertising. Here we focus on the strategic decisions firms make regarding product design, quality, and capacity in an oligopoly. Companies compete by enhancing their product features and improving quality to stand out in the market. At the same time, they also expand their production capacity, which sends a signal to competitors about their strength and commitment. These actions aren't isolated. Rivals observe them closely and often respond quickly, making this a kind of strategic dialogue. The moves firms make shape future pricing strategies, influence customer expectations, and set the tone for how competition unfolds. Essentially, product and capacity choices are powerful tools for signaling intent and securing a competitive edge in tightly contested markets. Let's talk about how location and timing can shape a company's competitive advantage. Securing key customers or scarce resources early can give a business a strong foothold in the market. However, being first isn't always a guaranteed win. Early movers face the risk that competitors will imitate or even improve upon their offerings. This is where game theory becomes really insightful. It helps explain why companies often choose strategic moves that are carefully timed and take their rivals into account, rather than just focusing on maximizing their own output in isolation. The key takeaway is that thoughtful timing and awareness of competitors are crucial to making successful strategic choices. Here we have a summary of key antitrust laws that regulate oligopoly. First, the purpose of antitrust law is to prevent harmful effects that arise when a few firms dominate a market, particularly addressing issues like collusion and abuse of market power. The Sherman Act specifically targets practices such as price fixing, market division, and conspiracies that restrain trade, which are serious threats to fair competition. The Clayton Act goes a step further by scrutinizing mergers and exclusive arrangements before they can negatively impact market competition. Finally, the Federal Trade Commission Act serves as a broad tool to combat unfair methods of competition, beyond the specific practices addressed in the other laws. Together, these laws form a comprehensive framework to maintain competitive markets and protect consumers from the abuses that can result from oligopoly. When it comes to limiting the power of oligopolies, antitrust enforcement plays a crucial role. Regulators actively investigate behaviors such as price fixing, bid rigging, and dividing markets among competitors, all of which can undermine healthy competition. By imposing substantial fines, issuing injunctions, and blocking mergers that would reduce competition, they create strong incentives for companies to compete fairly rather than colluding behind the scenes. It's important to note that antitrust laws don't aim to prevent firms from becoming large or successful. Instead, their focus is on stopping coordinated actions or exclusionary practices that would harm consumers and the market overall. This enforcement helps maintain a level playing field and encourages open, competitive markets.